Throughout railway history, there have been many examples of extremely small engines living long and interesting service lives, such as Gazelle and the Flying Buffer Beam. The thing is, these engines are one-of-a-kind, specially built units designed to fulfill a specific purpose. So what would you get if you were to build an entire batch of dinky little tank engines? The answer is disappointment. By the turn of the 20th century, many railways had found rail motors to be an ideal way of transporting passengers in urban areas and on low-traffic branch lines. However, they also came with some considerable drawbacks, most notably was their lack of power and flexibility. Because the engine's boiler had to be small enough to fit in the carriage without taking up too much space, their power was severely limited, and as such they often struggled on busy days, with their lack of strength also meaning they couldn't pull an additional coach to make up for their limited passenger space. Not helping was the fact that the engine and coach were permanently attached together, meaning you couldn't use one without using the other, significantly limiting the kinds of work they could do. As these issues became more apparent, the London and South Western Railway urgently needed some new engines to help work light passenger services, and so in 1906, their chief mechanical engineer Dugald Drummond came up with a quick solution. He felt that the simplest solution would be to essentially take the engine unit out of a rail motor and beef it up a bit. The rail motor units were compact, meaning they were already ideal for working in tight urban areas, and so all they really needed was a boost in performance in order to do the work required. The end result was a compact tank engine with an 8-foot wheelbase, 3-foot driving wheels, 10 by 14 inch cylinders, side tanks, and the unusual wheel arrangement of 220. They were designed to work push-pull services similar to the rail motors, but with enough strength to pull extra carriages on busy days, and because they weren't fixed to the carriages like the rail motors, it was much easier to shunt and arrange them, making them much more flexible to work with. Drummond also fitted them with water tubes, which were tucked away in the engine's side tanks. Classified as C14's, 10 were ordered, the first engines being built in 1906, with the final 2 being completed in 1907. They were put to work and tested on multiple services, and though they proved to be much more flexible than the rail motors, they left much to be desired. Because, as it turned out, taking the poor-performing engine unit from a rail motor and turning it into a locomotive leaves you with a poor-performing locomotive. For starters, they weren't very powerful, only having a tractive effort of 4,950 pounds, meaning they could only just pull one full carriage, never mind 2. Not helping was the 220 wheel arrangement, so even if the engine did have the power to move the carriages, it only had 2 wheels to apply it with. The C14's suffered greatly from wheel slip, not only when starting trains, but also when travelling at speed too. Not that they had a high top speed given their relatively small driving wheels. Their size also greatly limited their range too, as it was found their bunkers could only hold 1 ton of coal, just enough to make a short trip at best. One can only imagine how frequently they'd need to refill with water too, given the diminutive size of their water tanks. And finally, they were just a pain to maintain. While their size would have made cleaning, maintenance and turnaround times fairly quick, the water tube system Drummond designed them with was made inaccessible by the water tanks, making routine maintenance of them next to impossible. As a result, the C14's were only in service for a few years before being put to one side, only seeing use on rare occasions. Drummond naturally felt that he could do better, and in 1908 designed an 040 version of the C14's. These having bigger boilers, bigger cylinders, the water tubes removed, and with all 4 wheels being powered. 5 were ordered from Eastleigh Works, however it took until 1910 for the first 2 to be completed. Classified as S14's, these proved to be twice as powerful as their 220 counterparts, but not powerful enough to justify building more, and as such the rest of the order was cancelled. In 1913, the new chief mechanical engineer of the LSWR, Robert Urey, ordered that 4 of the C14's be rebuilt into 040's, likely to try and get some use out of them, but only 2 were converted by the time the First World War broke out. With a dozen useless passenger tank engines on their hands, the LSWR was more than happy to sell 9 of them, including both the S14's, to the War Office and Ministry of Munitions in 1916 and 1917, for use as shunting engines and to do other odd jobs around munitions facilities and dockyards. By the end of the war, only 3 C14's hadn't been scrapped, these being numbers 741, 744 and 745. All 3 had been converted into 040's by the time they came into the ownership of Southern Railways in 1923 and were put to work as dockyard shunters, occasionally taking on departmental duties. As Southern Railways was focused on electrifying most of their lines, like with many other Southern steam locomotives, the C14's were never really replaced, and as such eventually ended up under the ownership of British Railways. BR continued to use them as shunters and odd job engines, with 744, now numbered 30589, getting to pull one last passenger service in 1952. Eventually, 2 of the engines were withdrawn and scrapped in 1957, with the final C14 being withdrawn in 1959. None were preserved. What's interesting to note is that because of their unique size, no spare boilers were ever built for them, meaning that all of the C14's kept their original boilers their entire working lives, the ones in the BR engines being over 50 years old by the time they were cut up. So despite the flaws in their design, you certainly can't argue with their build quality. Whether you think the C14's were rubbish from the start, or just little engines that never found their niche, let them be a lesson that it's rarely the size of something that matters, but whether or not it was properly thought through. Subscribe for more.